sight and their ability to steer the business better than most. There was no such thing as ERP. The buzzword didn't exist. About 70% of ERP implementations do not deliver what was promised at the strategic executive level.
How do you convince an executive that an ERP system is the solution to the current chaos that is going on within that organization?
Look, I think that AI can help to check for risks, etc. But again, it comes back to the human beings. I believe we all have spirits. I believe that the Almighty guides us by His Spirit, and you're never going to replace that with a computer.
Welcome to another episode of the Business Backstage podcast. I am Bukola Osuntui, and today's conversation is one that every founder and business leader needs to hear. We're talking about something that sounds technical, but it affects every organization, whether you are a 5-person startup or you are a growing enterprise, and that is ERP, or Enterprise Resource Planning. Now, if that phrase makes you switch off, just stay with me, because the surprising bit is that every organization already has an ERP, so even if they don't realize it. So how do you know when your current systems, your spreadsheets, your tools, your apps are no longer enough? What are those signals that tells you that it is time to take ERP seriously before it starts to cost you money, time, and even your sanity? So to help us unpack this, I am joined by Dr. James Robertson. He's also known as the ERP Doctor. James is a professional engineer. He has spent decades bringing engineering discipline and strategic clarity into the world of ERP. He has worked with organizations to diagnose why so many ERP projects, over 70% in fact, fail to deliver on their promises. And he has built tools like the ERP Health Assessment to help leaders get it right. So let's go behind the scenes with the ERP Doctor, Dr. James Robertson. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Buki, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Amazing. So let us get straight to it. And I want us to start with the basics. We're talking about enterprise resource planning. It's possible that some people listening may have heard it before. Some would just be hearing it for the first time. We have people who are trying to get into the technical world. They want to start to work in the technical organizations, whether it's in a startup or the established organization. And at some point, they will start to hear the word ERP. So in the simplest terms, what exactly is an ERP? And is it also true that every organization already has one, even if they don't recognize it?
Thanks, Buki. The thing to understand about ERP is that it's one of these industry buzzwords. It's actually your accounting systems plus. So when I say that every business has an ERP, I'm saying that every business has some sort of accounting system, whether it's Xero or one of the small business accounting systems, that they have something which simplistically falls under the label of ERP. Now, as your business grows, if you're really a one-man band or a one-person band, you may be just getting by with a spreadsheet, etc. But the minute you get into a bit of software, like Sage has an entry-level product as well, Xero, whatever, you are getting into the domain of business systems. And at a very simplistic level, you're getting into the sort of entry level of ERP. And so you shouldn't be spooked by the phrase ERP. It's just the systems that you need to run your business. And then as you get bigger, you may add in some inventory. So you've got some stock and you need to manage that. And then you need to be able to do stock counts, etc. So you start with the entry level application, and then you add either additional modules or you upgrade to a more sophisticated version. So, for example, Sage, you have the absolutely basic Sage, and then you have Sage 200 and Sage 300 and Sage X3, all the way up to the enterprise level system that will work for an organization with thousands of people.
Thanks so much for that introduction. You have been working with ERP now since the 80s. How has ERP evolved over the years? And what would you say has changed the most dramatically?
Well, I think that it's important to understand that if we go back, my first exposure to a business information system was back in 1987. There was no such thing as ERP in that stage. The buzzword didn't exist. And and you couldn't go and buy something off the shelf. There was no SAP or Oracle or Microsoft Business Central or whatever that you could just go and purchase and install. Yeah. We had to design it and build it from scratch. So it was a learning curve, and we made mistakes, but we got it up and running and working eventually. And that system went on to be sold commercially and eventually became what one would call an ERP for the professional services sector as a so-called industry vertical ERP. In the mid-90s, you started to see fairly significant products like SAP, Oracle, etc., coming to the fore. And so by the mid-90s, you could go out there and you could buy I hesitate to use the word off the shelf, but I'll use it because I can't think of a better word, system like one of the ones that I've just mentioned. At that stage, they were still evolving. They had a lot of rough edges, and it was still a major learning curve. Fast forward to 2025 are a limited range of core mainstream ERPs like SAP, etc., the ones that I've just mentioned and many others. And there's a diversity. It kind of narrowed down back in the early 2000s, and then it's kind of spread out now that there are a diversity of ERP products available. And it's a case of looking for one that is tailored to your particular industry, that is a good fit to your industry and the way you want to do business. Once you've picked that, the challenge is to implement it effectively, and that's where the ERP doctor comes in, because the majority of people who implement ERP systems do so from an operational productivity process management point of view, and not from a strategic executive decision support point of view. And the impact of that is that you have this system which basically takes care of the day-to-day running of the business fairly effectively. But when you have strategic executive questions, you battle to get the answer because the system was not implemented with that in mind. And so I come along and I will help you to take account of the strategy of your business, the essence of your business and how it thrives, and incorporate that into the implementation of your ERP so that you achieve a high value outcome.
Interesting. So what I hear you say is that when it comes to matters of ERP, not just any leader is able to lead on that project. You're saying that it needs to be able to start from the top, or people in the organization that are in the strategic position to be able to respond to certain questions around ERP.
So what I'm saying is that the leaders of a business, the chief executive, the chief financial officer, chief operating officer, etc., the C-suite. Now, if you're talking about a small business, we're talking about the founder and maybe a couple of people who work alongside the founder. If we're talking about a much larger business, well, we're talking about a clearly defined executive team. Now, the reality is that with the small business, it may be that the founder has a clear view of the information they need.
Okay.
And they ensure that that's captured in the configuration of the software. But most of the time, people don't realize that if you want strategic executive information out of a system, you need to put strategic executive information into the configuration of the system. So they don't do that, and then they complain. As you mentioned in introducing me, if you go and search on Google or Gartner or Perplexity or ChatGPT, you will find a statistic which says that about 70% of ERP implementations do not deliver what was promised at the strategic executive level.
Yes.
And that is because nobody involved the executive team in designing the configuration of the ERP at the beginning, so you can't get that information out at the end. And it's important to draw the distinction between the machine and the configuration of the machine. So you have an ERP, it's an extremely versatile, extremely flexible, extremely powerful system, but you have to configure it to model your business. And more often than not, that modeling is substandard, and you get this phenomenon that people say, well, I've spent a fortune on this ERP, and I can't get the information I need when I need it. And there are a number of factors which give rise to that. I've documented that. I wrote a book on that many years ago, and that things haven't really changed much in the last few years. And I help clients to sort that out.
Interesting. So what would you say is are the most common pain points that an organization has that tells them that it is time to upgrade their systems?
The reality today is that a lot of the time replacing the software is not necessary. You may need to re-implement it, or you may need to revise the configuration, but it can grow quite substantially. If you get to a point where your business is really growing quite dramatically, you've maybe done a few acquisitions, you're going to get to a point where you say, well, you know what, I need a more sophisticated piece of software. I need more complexity. I need it to be able to model this. And therefore you go for a larger product. And you've got the so-called tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 products that are out there. So you come with the entry-level systems like the ones that I mentioned, which will probably help your business grow to about 20 or 30 employees, maybe £5 million annual turnover. You then get the next level, which are, for example, the Sage 200, Sage 300. There's a whole mass of systems in that space that will help you take your business up to maybe 1,000, 2,000 employees, maybe 250 million pounds a year turnover. And then as you get more complicated and you do more acquisitions, etc., you're going to get into the level of the so-called enterprise systems, which are the Sage X3, the SAP, mainstream SAP, the mainstream Oracle Financials, and other major systems, which will then take you as far as you want to go. The point being with all of those is that if you configure it to support strategic executive decision-making and you configure it well, it will grow with you to a fairly substantial extent.
Yeah.
If you configure it poorly, it will start to cramp you, and the immediate diagnosis will be, we need to get a new ERP, where in actual fact, in most cases, the diagnosis should be, you know what, this ERP has got legs still, but we need to look at the way we've configured it.
Interesting. I want us to talk about the risks, because implementing an ERP system is quite a lot. And like you said, it requires the executive buy-in. Now, some executives will probably be skeptical because of the risks that may be involved and also the costs, implications. So how do you convince an executive that an ERP system is the solution to the current chaos that is going on within that organization?
You know, from even a small business, you need a basic accounting system. So what you can get to is a point where the executive says, this system is not doing everything I need it to do. I need another system. And then the question is it a case of the software fundamentally lacks the capabilities to do what you want it to do, in which case, yes, you do need a new system? Or is it a case of we're just not using the system very effectively and we need to either re-implement or revise or tweak or tune the configuration? Now, one of the big things that goes wrong with these systems is that they rely on what I would call validation lists of classifications of information. So the most common one is the chart of accounts in the general ledger and the financial suite. Now, if you specify the general ledger chart of accounts for your small business and the business grows, the chart of accounts is going to get what I call ragged and scrappy, and it's going to start getting in your way and limiting it. Now, the answer to that is not necessarily to replace the software. The answer to that is possibly to sit back and go through a formal process, which is something that I do, and develop a much better structured chart of accounts.
Okay.
The same goes with the item class, the customer class, the supplier class, and all sorts of other tables in the ERP, which can get to a place where they're clumsy, badly structured, badly organized, and they're holding you back. And in all cases, the answer to that is not necessarily replace the software. The answer to that is have a look at the configuration and see if you can remediate the configuration, or as I say, re-implement. Because the fact of the matter is most of these software products can grow with you to a significant extent.
So when it comes to implementing a tool, it is one thing to implement, right? And then it's another thing for the people within the organization to accept the tool and to use it effectively. Now, I want us to talk about change management. People are usually scared of change. When something, I have worked in a number of tech organizations, and at some point there's always either the introduction of one tool or we're taking out another system, and people freak out like, what am I going to do? I've gotten used to this tool. I've been using it for maybe the last 3 years. There is just something about control that people don't want to let go of certain things, the old ways of doing things, because nobody wants to really start from the scratch and be a novice. How do you, in the whole process of implementing ERPs for organization, follow up on change management to be sure that everybody on the team has transitioned and they, are equipped to use the tools?
Okay, so there are a number of pieces there.
Yes.
Many times this thing that's called change management is consultants taking a blunt instrument and beating intelligent staff members over the head with it to do things that are really foolish and unwise. So what am I saying? One of the first things that I do is to put in place what I call executive custody.
Okay.
So the ERP is a transverse system. It cuts across the entire business. The owner of that integrated holistic view of the business is the chief executive, the founder. Therefore, the chief executive stroke founder must be the custodian of the ERP project.
Okay.
Because all too often they hand it off not even to the C-suite, the people directly under the CEO, but down to mid-level management. Because they say, this is a tech project, we don't understand tech, so we'll give it to you.
Yes.
Those people do not have the strategic executive view of the business, and so they implement things in a way that is not helpful. Now, what happens is that this thing is configured and it's quite clumsy and it doesn't reflect the strategic essence of the business. And users are saying, well, this is really clumsy. This doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't see what this is. And so then the consultants say, well, then we need some change management to educate these idiots because they can't use this thing effectively. If you go back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, and you start with executive custody, and you start with strategic essence, and you say, what are the fundamentals of the business? How do I model the business, the real world in this ERP? And I mentioned the chart of accounts, the item class, etc. Set that up in a very, very logical, very structured, very hierarchical, very easy to understand way. And suddenly people just find what they're looking for and it becomes easy to use, and the whole change management thing largely falls away. So a lot of the time, change management is about getting people to accept something that's been done very badly and very ineffectively. And if you do it right, the other thing is there's a tendency to leave a lot with the consultants. And then the consultants spend a lot of time learning about the business spends some time learning about the software, and then the consultants leave. And that's kind of like the staff fall into a big black hole because they don't have in their heads a lot of what was in the heads of the consultants. So one of the things that I advocate before you go live is something that I call a laboratory.
Okay.
And the laboratory is just a room with a number of computers in it. And you set it up and you say, right, we're now going to model every facet of the business. So you say, right, Jane, you get on the phone and phone in and place an order for 10 units of this product. And the phone goes, they pick up the phone, they take the order, check the details, etc. It gets processed, they send it to the warehouse, the product gets picked, it gets dispatched, it gets invoiced, the credit controllers chase up the invoice, it gets paid, the money's in the bank, and they can check it every step of the way. So they run a simulation, or what I like to call a war game.
Okay.
So they do everything they can to break it, because typically you will have unusual situations. This particular customer wants things this way. Can we do it? And so you do a lot of that. And when you've got all of that done, you then define your business processes. Now, you're going to say to me, but you should do the business processes at the beginning. No, that's
Okay.
one of the big errors people make. Business process is a design output. And one of the things that you'll find is that people who do business process work oversimplify. So, for example, if you talk about accounts payable, creditors, there's not one accounts payable process. There's 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 accounts payable processes. If you're ordering little cheap disposable pens from your local stationer against an agreed price, that's one process.
Okay.
If you're ordering a huge machine for the factory that has to go through various validations, etc., and competitive quotes and all the rest of it, that's a completely different process. And what people have a tendency to do is they sort of, my language, that into one process called the order to pay or something like that. And what I'm saying is, first of all, you need to make sure you've got all the fine definitions of the different processes. And then secondly, you design it in the laboratory until you can get that process working absolutely perfectly in the way that I just described. Then, once you've got all of that done, you produce your documentation, etc., and you bring every single staff member into that laboratory and you train them up until they're absolutely familiar with the software. So when you go live, the day that they go live and they sit down at their computer and there's the new software, they say, oh yes, that's what we saw in the laboratory. I know what to do.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time, change management is we didn't train people in a meaningful simulation of the real world. So when they get into the real world, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. And then they're resistant and they naturally say, well, the old way was better because I knew what to do.
So with this whole process of the change management, you have your own way. Would you also advocate for internal change agents? Because there'll always be a time where the consultants leave, maybe after training them, but because people learn at different paces. What do you think about having internal change agents that can just continue with the process and making sure that everybody is on the same page?
I maintain that in a typical project, too much is done by the consultants and not enough is done by the staff. I like to see maximum involvement of the staff, and what I advocate is, yes, you need to bring in some consultants who are experts on the software to help you set the thing up and to help with training. But then you must allocate to that project your most senior, most experienced staff members.
Good.
So that they make sure that the business is accurately modeled in the software, so that they know exactly what's going on, so that when the consultants leave, there's not a big gap, because you've got a team of people who've been in the project all along who know exactly what's going on.
Thank you so much for that breakdown on change management. I want us to move on to your scorecard. I want you to tell us more about the ERP scorecard. What does it measure and how is it different from other diagnostic tools out there? I mean, I tested it and I would say it's quite robust, but I want you to talk more about it.
Okay, so the rationale behind the scorecard is a lot of executives, as I said earlier, you find that if you search on Google or any one of these search engines today, that about 70% of ERP implementations do not deliver what was promised at the strategic executive level. So you end up with a situation where business owners, business executives have this discomfort that their ERP is not performing, and they can talk to other people and they say, yeah, you know, the thing about ERP non-performance is that if you go publicly to the chief executive of a company on the record and say, chief executive, what's your opinion of your ERP? In public, they're going to say it's fine because it's politically damaging to say I've got the system and it really doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
But if you get them off the record privately, they may well say to you, as I've had said to me, Dr. Robertson, at a strategic executive level, I would give my ERP 1 out of 10 because I have, and this is a real case example, FTSE 100 company, I have 4 very expensive senior accountants who spend 3 weeks a month in Excel producing the board pack because my big brand ERP and my big brand ERP data warehouse and my big brand ERP business intelligence tool can't give us the information we need. So I have a whole army of people who collects this information every month. But in that particular case, they have a big billboard which says name of company runs name of software. The best run businesses run name of software. So publicly, they say that the software is fantastic. Privately, they say it's a disaster. And the problem is that it's not the software that's the problem, it's the way the software has been configured. So basically, in order to help executives rate their ERP, I've developed this scorecard. And there are 25 questions, all on a numeric scale, which identify the different characteristics of a well-implemented ERP. So the respondent, the chief executive, or whoever's filling in the assessment, goes through it and says, okay, I'll give this a 6, I'll give this a 3, I'll give this a 5. And in doing that, they are presented with an indication of best practice. And then the end result of that is an invitation to a free, no obligation 2-hour virtual seminar where I take them through the details of why these things happen and what's required to fix it. And from there, they can then engage with me to provide consulting services.
So from the data that you collect from these scorecards, based on whatever it is that the potential clients are feeling, what would you say are the biggest issues that these organizations have?
The biggest pain point generally is that executives cannot get the answers to the questions they need at the strategic executive level when they ask the question. Somebody has to go burrowing around in Excel, pull data out, analyze it in Excel, do complex spreadsheets, and maybe after 2 or 3 days or maybe after 2 or 3 weeks, they'll get the answer to their question. Whereas if the ERP is well implemented and well configured, they'll get the answers almost instantaneously.
That is insightful. So let's move on to technological advancement. We all know what's going on right now. AI is powering all of the industries. So looking into the future, how do you see ERP evolving, particularly with cloud, with AI and predictive analytics that is, shaping the landscape?
Okay, let's take those one at a time. When it comes to cloud, it's really a matter of convenience. If you've got the server in the cloud, you can access it from anywhere, obviously within the limitations of your security, etc. And that's about where it begins or ends. If you have it on premise, then you have as the client, you have the obligation of purchasing the machines and providing a suitable environment and looking after them. If you put it into the cloud, you shift all of that out to your cloud services provider. Beyond that, you can do things that people do some clever things in the cloud, don't get me wrong, but it's as much an issue of convenience and risk management as it is anything else. The thing you've got to realize is if you're in the cloud and somebody blows up the local telecommunications junction box, you could be offline for a couple of weeks unless you set things up so that you've got multiple entry points, multiple communication links to multiple different telephone exchanges and data exchanges. If we talk about AI, obviously there's a huge amount of buzz about AI. Now, in answering this question, I want to repeat something that I touched on earlier. You have an operational level, which is transaction processing, it's repetitive, it's very standard. And you have a strategic executive level, which is unique to that organization today and is reliant on a high level of informed decision making by executives. The reason why senior business executives get paid the salaries they do is because of their strategic insight and their ability to steer the business better than most. So AI can be used widely in the operational level, but at the end of the day, you're still left with the reality that a customer is the same irrespective of what technology you're using. A product is the same irrespective of technology. A supplier is the same irrespective of technology. So there is a limit to what you're going to be able to do with AI. At the strategic executive level, you can do all sorts of fiddly things with AI. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts of really strategic thinking, AI has its limitations. And an interesting point about that, somebody challenged me a few weeks ago and said to me, Dr. Robertson, what you do is going to fall away with AI. So I thought, okay, that's an interesting thought. So I set myself up in a completely different Windows profile on my computer, and I set myself up with an incognito browser window, or 3 incognito browser windows, so that the software didn't know who I was or anything about me. And I went in and I asked ChatGPT and Grok and Perplexity, can AI do what Dr. James Robertson can do? And all 3 of them came back and said, no, what Dr. Robertson does, and this is based on my profile on LinkedIn and Google website, etc. What Dr. Robertson does is based on his decades of experience, and we can't compete with that.
Amazing. That's good. That is really, really good.
So the thing to realize about AI is if you go back to what I shared earlier, back in 1987 when we were designing that system, we had tiny disks. We had a narrow bandwidth. We implemented one of the first Novell networks. There was limited memory in the computers. You were constantly constrained by the limitations of the hardware. You had to work within those limitations. The programming languages were limited. Fast forward to 2025, none of that's any longer an issue. Disk storage is cheap. Bandwidth is cheap. The software is massively sophisticated. And so in a simplistic view, all that has happened with AI is that we've got to a point where we've got these massively powerful computers with masses of storage, masses of memory, masses of processor capability, with these massively sophisticated programming languages, and we can now do things easily that we couldn't have dreamt of 40 years ago. But we're still working with something where human beings ultimately provide the guidance. I use ChatGPT regularly in the marketing, etc. that I do. And I constantly have to make corrections and say to it, no, I've told you to do this. Don't do that. And it goes off and it invents things and it has its limitations. It's very impressive at one level. But if, like me, you are very technology savvy and you want to push the tech to its boundaries, well, then it becomes absolutely apparent that you're dealing with software that has limitations.
Yeah.
And some people will say, well, that's just part of the learning curve. It's going to change. I don't think so. I come from a point of view, I'm a religious person. I believe in the Creator. I believe we all have spirits. I believe that the Almighty guides us by His Spirit. And You're never going to replace that with a computer.
I agree with you.
So AI can do some fantastic things. Don't get me wrong. I use it all the time. But it has limitations. And I think it will always have its limitations. And then, the thing about AI creating a war or what have you, well, that's dependent. If there's a human being that wants to program ChatGPT to create a situation that results in a war, well, then they're going to do it. But it's not per se the AI. It's the human being that's using the AI.
It's the human being, and the human being will always, remain superior because we are the ones creating the model. We're designing the model. We're feeding it with, with the data. So of course, there would still be those flaws, but we can't deny that every day, I think there's this perfection. There's this attempt at perfecting what was before. So speaking of that, since we're still talking about predictive analytics, do you see AI significantly improving the risks of cybersecurity when it comes to ERP? Because one of the risks is that all your tools are in one system. And if anything happens, if there is some form of cyber attack, it can cause a major loss. What do you think about how AI can change that or improve things when it comes to the risks involved?
Bookie, I think that AI can help.
Yeah.
It can help to check for risks, etc. But again, it comes back to the human beings.
Okay.
The human beings who train that AI are going to impact what the AI can and can't do. And the thing there's generative AI, as in ChatGPT, for example, and there's just expert systems, where expert systems have been around for the last 30, 40 years. They've just become very, very expert recently. So there's a tendency to use the label AI for everything to do with expert systems, whereas in fact a lot of AI is in fact expert systems, rule-based systems, and that you can get very good at forecasting. They've got all sorts of things of medical problems that have been solved, but there you've had really capable people with a lot of knowledge and experience programming that expert system. It hasn't just woken up one day and said, I'm going to solve this genetic problem.
That is true. We're getting towards the end of the episode. I just have one last question for you, Dr. Roberts. When people look back on your work, you've been doing this work for decades now, what do you hope that they would remember about the ERP doctor, especially as even ChatGPT cannot compete with you? What is your hope? What do you...
That's quite a question, Bookie. I hope that they will remember that I helped them to unlock the full potential of the ERP.
Interesting. Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a powerful conversation with the ERP doctor, Dr. James Robertson. For me, if there's one takeaway from today, it's that one, organizations already have ERP systems in some form, but the real question is whether it is helping your business to run smoothly or if it's quietly holding you back. So it's important, if you're listening to this episode, to start to pay attention to the signals. What are the errors that you're experiencing with your systems? What are the duplicated work? What are the delays? They are all telling you something. So you can learn more about assessing your business systems using James's ERP health assessment and other resources linked in the show notes. So Dr. James, how can people contact you if they want to?
The easiest way to contact me is james.robertson@the-erp-doctor.com.
You can contact Dr. James Robertson to learn more about assessing your business systems using his health assessment and other resources that I will link in the show notes. So thank you so much for listening to Business Backstage, wherever you are. Until next time, I am Bukola Osuntuyi, and I will see you on the next episode.